Production by Liang Gu, author of A Piece of Sunshine, Lin Hui-Yin. In Mourning for Jima. On November 19th, our good friend Su Jima, a new poet beloved by many people, was unexpected, unbelievable, and cruel, and died in danger on a plane. This news touched the hearts of many friends like a needle on the morning of the 20th, making the sky that morning as dark as ink, and the throats of mourning choked everyone's throat. Jima, death, who has ever thought of combining these two sentences together? He is such a lively person. Such a person who has just stood at the peak of his prime. Friends are often surprised by his activities, his childlike spirit and seriousness. Who would have thought of his death? No one has an idea, no one has any. Such a person who has just stood at the peak of his prime. Friends are often surprised by his activities, his childlike spirit and seriousness. Who would have thought of his death? No one has an idea, no one has anything to say. Emotions do not allow us not to mourn this sudden misfortune, and reason does not allow us to have supernatural fantasies. Facing each other in silence, sitting around in silence. But Jima still died without looking back. There is no news, he will never look back, and there will never be news again. Having said that. But he has been dead for 2 weeks. I don't need to say more about the poet Jima. His many poems are the scale by which he can be evaluated. The history of our new poetry is so short, and I'm afraid the people who can judge it are still among our children and grandchildren. What I want to talk about is Jima besides being a poet. As for whether all his works are lyrical, are his interests limited to emotions? It's even more wrong. Jima's interests are extremely broad. There are just a few things that would make people who don't recognize him feel strange. Suddenly, he breaks out of our common world and sinks into eternal silence, without giving us any warning, any preparation, or a last hope. This kind of determination, which was almost unbearable, shocked the hearts of many friends that day. Now that is an undeniable fact. Still blocking our front relentlessly. No matter how painfully we mourn his tragic death, and how desperately we hope to still be able to get in touch with his original voice and appearance, the fact is that there is no possibility that we have to move because of our mourning. This embarrassing eternal silence and depression is the cruelest part of death. Now this fact is becoming more solid, more fixed, and more undeniable day by day. Jima is dead. This simple and cruel reality has already. This embarrassing eternal silence and depression is the cruelest part of death. Now this fact is becoming more solid, more fixed, and more undeniable day by day. Jima is dead. This simple and cruel reality has already been added with the color of time. One day when he was studying in the school building, it was pouring rain outside, a violent rain that could only be seen in island countries like England. Suddenly he heard someone knocking on his door, and jumped into a man who was completely drenched by the rain. Wet guests. Needless to say, he is Jima. As soon as he entered the door, he grabbed Yuan Ning and ran out, telling him to come quickly and we would wait on the bridge. Yuan Ning was stunned by this, and he asked Jima what he was waiting for in the heavy rain. Jima opened his eyes wide and said happily like a child, "Look at the rainbow after the rain." Yuan Ning not only said that he would not go. As soon as he entered the door, he grabbed Yuan Ning and ran out, telling him to come quickly and we would wait on the bridge. Yuan Ning was stunned by this, and he asked Jima what he was waiting for in the heavy rain. Jima opened his eyes wide and said happily like a child, "Look at the rainbow after the rain." Yuan Ning not only said that he would not go. He also advised Jima to change out of his soaked clothes as soon as possible and put on a raincoat to go out. The humidity in Britain was child's play. Jima ran away without waiting for him to finish. In addition, he is very interested in drama and painting. Needless to say, drama is so close to poetry. He also advised Jima to change out of his soaked clothes as soon as possible and put on a raincoat to go out. The humidity in Britain was child's play. Jima ran away without waiting for him to finish. In addition, he is very interested in drama and painting. Needless to say, drama is so close to poetry. His talent for appreciating painting is also considerable. His talent for appreciating painting is also considerable. He has very precise likes and dislikes for several post-impressionist painters. He is also very familiar with those from the Renaissance. He loves Botticelli and Leonardo da Vinci the most. Naturally, he often admitted that the literati's appreciation of painting was often indirectly influenced by other people's papers. His was influenced a lot by Roger Fry and Walter Pater. Friends, we have lost more than a friend and a poet. What we have lost is a personality that is both urgent and lovable. What we have lost is a personality that is both urgent and lovable. I went out on a date in the evening, and when I came back very late, the waiter said that he had been here again. In fact, he may be stupid or crazy. In fact, he is just more serious than us, pious to the point of stupidity and madness. When he is happy, his happy wings can touch the sky. When he is sad, his sorrow is bottomless. The measurement of ordinary evaluation has lost its effectiveness in his hands. He has his own views on the pros and cons, which are purely out of ordinary principles of artistic emotion. Therefore, people often hear friends talking about him and always say with a sigh, "That's Jima, what can you do?" I have known him for 10 years. At that time, he was at the London School of Economics and had not yet gone to Cambridge. The first time I met him was the first time he got to know Mr. Dickinson, who influenced him to move to school. Needless to say, he and my father had the best rapport. Although they were quite different in age, they became close friends as soon as they met. After he arrived in Cambridge, he was introduced to the Royal Academy by Dickinson. His classmates at that time were my sister-in-law Wen Genuaning. Until the past 2 months, Yuaning often told many of his jokes at that time. Although they were jokes, it was also his earliest surprising impression of Jima. We live in this age without religion, and we are so unsure of death. From now on, I will spend many days thinking about you, and I am afraid that they will be all dark pain, without any light, unless I also have your beautiful and poetic faith. There is no one among us who absolutely believes in the theory of fate, but who is not surprised by this unexpected life, and how can we not feel the fragility of human power and the limitation of wisdom at the traces of many facts? Is everything settled in this world? Are all things accidental? When will we have complete certainty about this eternal question? When will we have complete certainty about this eternal question? We are not superstitious and look at the curtain of death without religion, and we are not sure at all. We want appeal when we open our mouths, we want fall into dreams when we close our eyes, and we linger on the edge of reason and emotion. We cannot predict what will happen in the future. We are just always stunned by this death, swallowing dry tears, waiting for time to exploit the sharpness of mourning and scab the wounds of each time we mourn. Didn't many of the friends who got the news at the beginning of that afternoon run to Mr. Hushizi's house? But apart from wiping away tears and sitting around in silence, no one had an idea, no one knew what to say, damn it. My personal sadness inevitably disturbed many of my clear memories of his life and the forgiveness of my friends. I don't say I understand. Because don't many people like to say that Jima is the least understanding of human nature? I said this is his characteristic. Because don't many people like to say that Jima is the least understanding of human nature? I said this is his characteristic. We ordinary people like to say that we understand, we sympathize with those who understand, we feel lonely and even embarrassment if we do not understand. Sympathy for what we can understand. We think it's appropriate, we don't sympathize with what we can't understand, and we think it's fair. I shouldn't be moaning incoherently about the sadness of our being friends. In the final analysis, readers read with our words, just like Zemo's Qin by Lei. We want to hear something more about Shima from our mouths. I understand this, but I'm afraid I won't be able to satisfy you, because there are too many things about him that are touching and make young people know that there is a rare personality here, and cannot be expressed in a few thousand words. Everyone has to admit that there are not many people like him in the world, whether in China or abroad. Everyone has to admit that there are not many people like him in the world, whether in China or abroad. I'm not exaggerating for Shimo here, because in fact, just because of this incident, Shimo himself laughed a lot this summer. Shima, my friend. Death is just a new journey. We have never been there before, so we can't help but doubt too much. Death may be more difficult than this life. We cannot easily conclude that there is no sunshine and the comfort of human kindness on the other side. But as I said before, the most embarrassing thing is the eternal silence. Jima's serious poetry never contains any pretense. His infatuation and childlike innocence are really surprising. Jima's most touching characteristics are his unbelievable purity of innocence, his sincerity for his ideals, his seriousness in appreciating art, and his practical experience of emotions. They are all extremely valuable. Jima is different. Whether he understands or does not understand, he does not exaggerate too much. He only knows gentleness, peace, and consideration. As long as he knows that there are emotions, no matter who it is from, under what circumstances, he thinks it is appropriate or not intellectually. He is capable of showing some sympathy, and he can truly appreciate the difference between forgiving others and himself. He will never harshly judge anyone who is different from him on the scale of strict and obsolete morality. He is capable of showing some sympathy, and he can truly appreciate the difference between forgiving others and himself. He will never harshly judge anyone who is different from him on the scale of strict and obsolete morality. Regarding architectural aesthetics, he often apologized to Sicheng and me and said, "I'm so sorry. My architectural knowledge is all that of Ruskins." He knows that we hate Ruskins. But to see the ruins of an ancient building and a stone carving, he is more enthusiastic than anyone else and can appreciate it more calmly. What unfolds before us is only a pile of solid facts. Later, I curiously asked Jima whether this story was true, and he smiled and nodded, admitting that the whole story was true. I asked, "What about the next part? How long did you wait on the bridge and did you see a rainbow?" He said he couldn't remember clearly, but he actually saw a rainbow. I interrupted his description of the rainbow in surprise and asked him, how did he know that there would be a rainbow? He answered me with a proud smile, completely poetic belief. His gentleness and grace can really make many people feel ashamed. I can honestly say that at least he is much greater than most of us. He feels that all kinds of human emotional actions have their own differences. I can honestly say that at least he is much greater than most of us. He feels that all kinds of human emotional actions have their own differences, and their value is magnified from the perspective of human beings. Sympathy should not be limited to the scope we demarcate. Inside. He stood in the rain waiting for the rainbow. He was willing to risk social disapproval to fight for his freedom of love. He took a tortuous train to the countryside to worship Hadai. He abandoned the temptation of a doctorate and packed up his school bag to go to England, just to worship Russell as a teacher. A special situation, a special moment of emotion. From then on, he took risks in life, abandoned all his old careers, and just tried to write a few lines of new poems. The fate of trying new poems in the past few years was not very encouraging, and cynicism was commonplace. He could often walk a few miles. Go pick some flowers. Going through a lot of trouble to see a friend say a few words, these, and many more, are not mysteries that we can easily understand. I saw him the night before his flight. At that time, he didn't know that his flight to the south the next morning had been rescheduled 3 times. He once said that if it continued to be rescheduled, he won't leave. He and I came out of the same tea party and parted ways at the entrance of Zongbu Alley. He won't leave. He and I came out of the same tea party and parted ways at the entrance of Zongbu Alley. At this tea party, we invited Dr. Bai Lei, who came for the Pacific Conference, because he was the sister-in-law of Mansfield, the female writer whom Jima admired most in his life. Jima was very attentive. I hope to get some more insights about Mansfield's early years from Bai Lei, but due to time constraints, we dispersed in a hurry after tea. Is he really a weirdo? Friends, no, not at all. He is just more affectionate, more sincere, and more naive than us. We have more faith in all things than we do, in God, in people, in spirits, in nature, and in art. He is right, friends. In the final analysis, how many people, how many things, how many emotions can we understand? What matter and what person does not have a multifaceted view? We have more faith in all things than we do, in God, in people, in spirits, in nature, and in art. He is right, friends. In the final analysis, how many people, how many things, how many emotions can we understand? What matter and what person does not have a multifaceted view? He loved mathematics in his early years. He has always been very fond of astronomy. He knows a lot of the names and parts of the stars in the sky. He likes stargazing most on summer nights. He took the train several times with books about the science of the universe. He once translated Einstein's theory of relativity. In 1922, he wrote an article about the theory of relativity and published it in the magazine Minduo. He often joked to Sicheng, Mr. Rengong's knowledge of the theory of relativity came from my masterpiece, Su Jun Jima. Because he said that he had read a lot about Einstein's philosophy but never understood it. He only understood it after reading Shima's article. He likes colors, although he can't paint himself. During the summer vacation, he sent me several letters from Hangzhou. He called them descriptive watercolor paintings. He wrote down the color of the mulberry fields in the west side, in English in great detail. He carefully observed every bit of green and every color of goose yellow. Another time he looked at the broken wall in my garden and remained silent for a long time. Afterwards, he told me that he was silently experiencing it. I want to describe the bright evening sun and the vines that have just entered autumn on the wall. This summer I was recuperating in Xiangshan, and he often came here to chat. One day he talked about his childhood schooling experience and his 2 years studying economics at Clark University in the United States. We couldn't help but laugh at each other for a long time. Later, he also mentioned this passage in the preface of his Tiger collection. But strange. Unlike many geniuses who either failed or were kicked out of school when they were young, he often got top marks. I heard that one time, a very strict economics professor at Cornell's summer school even wrote a letter to a professor at Clark University to compliment his students about a very difficult subject. People say that Jima is just casually romantic, and Jima's poems are all lyrical poems. This assertion may sound fair to those who don't know him, but it is really a pity for him from the perspective of his friends. Jima is a very eccentric person. He is romantic, but the best thing about him is his sympathy, kindness, and kindness towards others. There is no one he is not kind to. There is no kind of person that he cannot be tolerant of, and there is no kind of emotion that he cannot express sympathy for. There is no kind of person that he cannot be tolerant of, and there is no kind of emotion that he cannot express sympathy for. For this reason, it is not surprising that Jima has so many friends. It is also a very natural result that everyone who knows him has special feelings for him, no matter how deep or shallow they are. On the other hand, he himself received very little sympathy in the course of his life. Not only that, he was almost not tolerated by society several times because of his foolish sincerity for his ideals. But he never begrudged his compassion for others and his temperament. Who has never turned into a mean and violent person because of being stimulated? Who can deny that he has a superhuman tolerance? The telegram was sent from Nanjing Airport at 9 o'clock. A car was sent to pick her up, but at 4:30, it was said that the plane had not arrived, dash. I haven't arrived, the airline said it's foggy in Jinan, it's very heavy. It's just an hour's difference, when I arrived at Nanyuan at 3 p.m., it was foggy in Jinan. Who believes that such different facts can happen in just 1 hour, Shimo, my friend? Yes, he sent me a telegram on the morning of the 19th. He is scheduled to fly at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning, and his life or death is uncertain. I was stunned. I felt unhappy for a while, but I hurriedly gave him a call. Completely poetic faith, I'm going to cry here. That is to say, because of this poetic belief, he insists on using the convenience of aviation to achieve his long-cherished wish of wanting to fly. The plane is very stable, he said. If something happens, it's my fate. Such a completely poetic belief in destiny. On the morning of the 19th, yes. He said he would arrive at Nanyuan at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and send a car to pick him up. It was just after he started flying. Such a completely poetic belief in destiny. On the morning of the 19th, yes. He said he would arrive at Nanyuan at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and send a car to pick him up. It was just after he started flying. Don't worry. He said, it's very safe. He was interested in both Chinese and Western music, and his enthusiasm awakened Beijing's attention to music once, perhaps the only time. No one can forget that year, Klasla went to Beijing to play the violin at the True Light for more than an hour. He must also be considered good at old dramas. During the last few days when he was in Beijing, we went to listen to several plays together. When we returned home, we had lively discussions that were more sincere and energetic than any theater reviewer. Who believes in such a person who is so loyal to life? He will leave us forever so early and join another world, where he will be silent forever and no longer make any sound. He will leave us forever so early and join another world, where he will be silent forever and no longer make any sound. I dare not write any more. If Jima had the spirit to hear a child who was much younger than him talk about his character in an old-fashioned tone, wouldn't he feel unhappy? Here I have another extremely embarrassing memory. That year he wrote the article about my father's tragic death in the same newspaper. This dreamlike life took several turns, but once upon a time, it was my turn to hold him and hang him in the windy night. Of tragic changes. What kind of life is this? What kind of wind? What road? Shima. Your final liberation is not happiness or wisdom. I should envy you. But it's crispy and tender. Your final liberation is not happiness or wisdom. I should envy you. But it's crispy and tender. Living in these very stimulating years, I dare to take a breath and say that I believe there must be many people who have been disturbed by what they observe and hear all day long. All kinds of emotions accumulated from the bottom of my beating and blood-coated heart, rushing out of my throat and forcing them into words on my tongue. This natural and rich accumulation sometimes overflows the lips and tongues of a few people, and then rushes to the tip of the pen, taking another form and turning into words galloping on the white paper. This kind of writing is the product of our era, and everyone should cherish it. Now, no matter where we are, if there is one or more opportunities, we can hand over many of these naturally triggered words to the public of the same generation. Therefore, it may inspire more aspects and more complex emotions, and form more forms of words from these emotions. It has always created a large area of rich and powerful creative fields, forests, rivers, and mountains, producing solid expressions and articles unique to our time. Should we sincerely pay attention to this opportunity or the career that can be created, and each of us dedicate a little bit of our efforts to try it? Isn't it possible that in our time there are not all kinds of characters and comic and tragic life themes? Don't we have beauty now? No elegance, no ugliness, no panic, no emotion, no hope. Don't we know how to describe these natural and man-made disasters? How can we not express indignation and sing out a stream of boiling blood after experiencing so many piercing humiliations? This era is unique to us. As a result, we only have emotions but no art to express these emotions. We see future generations laughing at us as dumb people from the Dark Ages. We have no art and no articles, and even doubt whether we have emotions. As for the author who holds his toes high the first time and gets discouraged the second time, their ups and downs are inevitable in every era. This is only a side issue with the development of the main body of the creative world. What era of flourishing creativity lacks publications that introduce and distribute works? Their ups and downs are inevitable in every era. This is only a side issue with the development of the main body of the creative world. What era of flourishing creativity lacks publications that introduce and distribute works, with readers who may sympathize with them or not understand them? Crispy and tender? All of us must take care of it. Now traveling around the world is the main force that stimulates creation. Especially in China, on such a day, what do those eyes see, and the tongue doesn't immediately want to speak urgently, or even cry? If the creative world is still a bit depressed and lonely, there are few efforts and few attempts, then there may be other reasons. We ask, what encourages activity in the creative community? Can publications help relieve this depression? People who work hard to create publications. You must know that publications often die due to other complicated reasons. It is always a very fragile child. You must know that publications often die due to other complicated reasons. It is always a very fragile child. With such creative writing skills and arms working hard on publications, why not join forces at this moment and cooperate again to force the creative world to sprout a fresh sprout? Regardless of whether it can become fields, forests, or rivers in the future, a sprout is a sprout. Can we admit something frankly? The encouragement of creation often relies on publications to spread its achievements out in the air, bask in the sun, and meet the readers of the times. Chilled by the wind. The sun has withered, which is a common thing. Being welcomed, indifferent, misunderstood, or sympathized by readers should all be the medicine to stimulate creativity in the final analysis. Greek tragedies were sung and performed in front of tens of thousands of people, and Shakespeare's plays were seen by rough people in the streets. In Europe in the era of publications, not to mention, when a poem comes out, everyone is eager to buy it. Even when China was having difficulties with printing, it was passed on and recited for a while. How can I not feel ashamed when I look back and see the mantle of dignity passed down from my ancestors? Talk about chaos in the world. What kind of life does old man do live? Xin Jiaxuan's indignation that day should make us sympathize. Why bother to sue? The complaint will never end. What kind of life does old man do live? Xin Jiaxuan's indignation that day should make us sympathize. Why bother to sue? The complaint will never end. But it is often prompted by the encouragement and efforts of publications. Creative works cannot but meet the times, although the name of the author is not certain. There are great works that have not met our times, but there are some that were discovered and cherished by other times, but these are only occasional exceptions. Suppose that there is an opportunity to gather many people here to introduce many aspects of the text, and further study the qualitative aspects of the article, or point out the history of previous articles, or pay attention to the comparative issues in various articles, and then invisibly it pays attention to issues such as level and standards. I dare to believe that under this situation, there will be a more serious motivation to encourage writing. Adding problems to the creative community, perhaps. Only by increasing the number of problems does it contribute to the vitality and health of creation. Literature and art are by no means. I dare to believe that under this situation, there will be a more serious motivation to encourage writing. Adding problems to the creative community, perhaps. Only by increasing the number of problems does it contribute to the vitality and health of creation. Literature and art are by no means overgrown weeds. Are we really numb? Is it true that the language of our time is so poor that it cannot express its meaning? Is it true that our era is really devoid of knowledge and articles? Friends, work hard to push forward the sprouts of vitality, and remember that this era belongs to us. Shaanxi Communications. Times. When we arrived in Shaanxi, the sky was transparent blue, and the white clouds were so flowing that people could forget a lot of things, just a little bit of emotion, not to mention the mountains, rivers, small fortresses, and villages reflecting the sunset. A corner temple, a tower. The scenery is so beautiful that it makes people panic and feel heartbroken. Speaking of this temple and that one, they are all very old. No one can tell when they were built. There were so many people talking that it was really difficult for us to work, but we were all very happy. The child was eating with his rice bowl in his arms and watching with wide eyes, not relaxing at all. We, who came from Peiping City, looked east and walked west, with the setting sun on our backs. It was like falling into another world. There seemed to be no barrier between the clouds, the sky, and us. The child was eating with his rice bowl in his arms and watching with wide eyes, not relaxing at all. We, who came from Peiping City, looked east and walked west, with the setting sun on our backs. It was like falling into another world. There seemed to be no barrier between the clouds, the sky, and us. I laugh happily when I am having fun, and the laughter spreads all the way to the river and the mountains, maybe to which forest or village. I felt a kind of flatness, maybe even vastness, stretching out exactly parallel to the ground. The edge of the feeling was the edge of the earth. Always keep pushing forward. The 10 days that pass by are full of pictures, and the days are like ancient events that can be sung. In the dark night, I watched the craftsmen from Hunan and Shaanxi in the mountain farm, surrounding a big red stove to forge iron. The fire and sonorous sound dispersed into 4 groups of black shadows. In the light of the moon, I walked to find the abandoned temple in the field. I drew a lantern and secretly looked at the face looking at Guanyin. It was peaceful. For hundreds of years, there was no emotion, but under that flash of light, there seemed to be a smile. I have never been out, and it is difficult to move until I have started. After coming out, I don't know how to live in exile. When we leave, people from the village always come to deliver them. The daughter-in-law points them out to the old woman, and the children have to keep up with them for a while they run. Kaiza Town, Xiaoxiang Village, and Daxiang Village are all equally lively. When we saw the statue of Tianbao in the 3rd year of the Northern Qi dynasty, we accidentally let out a cry of surprise. The older people in their village, with their bent backs, also showed a proud smile, knowing that the treasure in their village was actually scared. Here comes this strange visitor. We took a lot of walks to visit historical sites. Under various circumstances we felt the ups and downs of the past and the present. Reading tablets in the grass, or accidentally encountering the hands and smile of a bodhisattva among the bricks can arouse some unusual feelings. I won't say. It's just crazy talk that people can't bear to hear. I am not good at describing some actual situations. In short, in the distance, there are people working in a field temple, with green, yellow, and purple flowers growing in separate rows. On every hillside, there are people walking and herding sheep. Facing the sunshine. With the sun behind it, the rotating light and shadow are projected. In each small town, there is a city tower standing in front, and a small temple sleeping next to it. There is also a stone tower, and gods and people are obedient and contented, guarding their corner of the world. With the sun behind it, the rotating light and shadow are projected. In each small town, there is a city tower standing in front, and a small temple sleeping next to it. There is also a stone tower, and gods and people are obedient and contented, guarding their corner of the world. Some of the children had 3, 4, or even 5 or 6 pigtails on their heads. Their clothes were so simple that only a red belly was left, and it was vaguely embroidered with 2 or 3 flowers chosen by her grandma. Some of the children had 3, 4, or even 5 or 6 pigtails on their heads. Their clothes were so simple that only a red belly was left, and it was vaguely embroidered with 2 or 3 flowers chosen by her grandma. Under the shade of the trees in front of the Empress Temple, who can you stop from watching the fun? The teacher came out, and the soldiers from the army came over with their horses. A few women shyly held hands and twisted to stand on one side. The children fought to squeeze in, watching us take pictures, and measuring the surface with a measuring tape. The teacher helped. We rubbed the inscription. Various romantic locations in the countryside. Beautiful and innocent, the figures in the middle maintain their bright colors. The old one is holding a cane, the young one is bare-chested, and their bright eyes and smiling faces are dotted along the road. Isn't it too beautiful and innocent? The figures in the middle maintain their bright colors. The old one is holding a cane, the young one is bare-chested, and their bright eyes and smiling faces are dotted along the road. Isn't it too old? They asked proudly. Almost 1400 years ago. Ah, 1400 years. We all became proud together. We looked at the temples rebuilt in the Jin dynasty here and the temples rebuilt in the Ming dynasty there, and discussed the peculiarities of the style, the look of the statues, and the procedures. The sky gradually became dark, and we felt thirsty in our mouths, feeling hungry. I just remembered that the whole day was about to end. When we come back and lie on the bed, the beautiful and vivid impression still hangs in front of our eyes, guiding us to all kinds of pleasant dreams. At the same time, the vegetables and fruits we eat for dinner will replenish our energy for tomorrow. Until a big sun shines redly on our faces. Outside the window. Where do you start talking? When you want to speak, it is so difficult to find the source of any words. At this moment, sitting right in front of my eyes were the back figures of 4 country people. One head was wrapped in dark white cloth, 2 had faded blue cloth, and the other had a bald head. They raised their knees, half squatting and half sitting, resting on the short wall along the stream. Each person held a simple thing, a white wooden stick and a basket. I couldn't see the 2 clearly under the shade of the tree. Undoubtedly, they have walked a long way, and in a moment, after smoking a pipe of dry cigarettes, they will still have to walk a long way. The fragrance of orchid smoke frequently hits my senses with the breeze, and there are also a few tones of Shangxi Bangzi in the blur. Even though they were sitting outside the screened windows of my porch. How many things do you still want to understand through a window? Yesterday I hired someone surnamed Lu to pour water, and today I imitated the foreign devils and wandered around, going to a house with chickens and sheep below, and a plaque with Wu Kuei hanging on it. Let them greet you with a local accent that you don't understand, eat food, sit on the kong, sit for a long time, go out to the door, and be polite with the woman who sees you off, and then suddenly realize that she is the surnamed Lu who pours dirty water for you to wash clothes. Wang's son's mother even sent cakes to your house the night before. The old man who came from Shangxi for business and the politeness sitting next to him were forced to do so. The customer who got off the bus from Jiaoqing had some reasons for handing the red packet of cigarettes to the steward of the car dealership. The old woman in a cotton vest silently held the cigarette lid in a blue cloth bag. A purse was obtained after she had used up all her money. Sure enough, when she arrived at Jitsuan, she missed the stop. Fortunately, another customer asked the driver to move the car back 2 miles. She looked at the village in disbelief. I stood there, mumbling about how this place was different from last time. While driving, he grumbled and climbed onto the roof of the car to help the old woman carry her luggage. His experience gave him a certain kind of discipline. Old ladies who don't know the road are inevitable when traveling. This principle is the same all over the world. The reason why the London police are so kind. I also got it from the lost old ladies and children. Outside the iron screen window, the words don't stop here. Always outside the window, either a screen window or a glass window, in short, outside the window. It is not without colors, sounds, and all life activities. It's just that there is always a window between them and you, fan-shaped, hexagonal, gauze, glass. The joy that extravagant idea brought to that person has completely lost its effect on you, and there is no hope of shining a star. You think, what you spent throughout the entire month. Comparing it with the standard of living around you outside your window, strictly speaking, aren't they all very wasteful? Every time you spend extravagantly, you will only feel sad once more, so the glass windows the car passes by will only make you more frightened, hollow and doubtful. Hesitating before and after. And after looking at the various goods in the store, unless you are really stupid, don't you know which country's factories they are mostly made by? Luxury cannot bring you happiness, it can only increase your worries and worries. Every foot of beautiful yarn and every fresh handicraft. This place is separated by windows. You don't understand. The harvest is good every year. Why has the village become poor in the past few years? Every foot of beautiful yarn and every fresh handicraft. This place is separated by windows. You don't understand. The harvest is good every year. Why has the village become poor in the past few years? I only vaguely heard that the army has been stationed for more than 3 years, and I don't understand. The village's entertainment after a year of hard work, singing and opera in the Guandi temple, does it require money from the boss? Since you can't understand through a window, just ventilate your voice and stop asking. This is really rare, and there is evidence for the origin of the goodwill. It was that morning that you accidentally went out to explore ancient times. The mountains and rivers in this province are beautiful, and the ancient temples and temples are often the originals of the Song and Liao dynasties. When I walked to the Guandi temple in a small village on the mountain, I saw an iron altar with a Wanli year number engraved on it. It turned out that Wanli gave this village Qingqing the property of the king's descendants somehow ended up in the hands of antique sellers. I asked the pastor to buy it 7 years ago. I was playing with it at night. The loud ringing of the bell was heard by the villagers. They hurriedly came to inquire about it and wanted to buy it back at the original price. They expressed their sincere. I asked the pastor to buy it 7 years ago. I was playing with it at night. The loud ringing of the bell was heard by the villagers. They hurriedly came to inquire about it and wanted to buy it back at the original price. From then on, it was worshipped in front of the Guandi temple. In this way, a romantic picture unfolds in front of your window, which piques your curiosity. Regardless of whether it is 1 or 2 windows away, from then on, it was worshipped in front of the Guandi temple. In this way, a romantic picture unfolds in front of your window, which piques your curiosity. Regardless of whether it is 1 or 2 windows away, you can't help but want to find out the details. How did Ming Qing become the king's concubine? People will be named Lu. Now the article is quite long. This makes your heart beat a little. The man you hired to fetch water and wash clothes yesterday is also from Zhaozhuang village, and his surname is Lu. As expected, the rustic, round-faced, big-eyed young man was a nobleman of royal descent, which was really disrespectful. Then this village must not be poor, but in fact this is not necessarily the case. The car was going farther and farther, and it bumped into a dung truck in front of it. You immediately took out your handkerchief, frowned, and covered your nose tightly, not knowing who to blame. The car starts to roll, but the world is still outside your window. There is a long alley, and the gates are tightly closed. Even if it is open, it only exposes a corner. You can vaguely see a pumpkin shed inside, with a woman sitting on a small stool sewing at the bottom. The other is holding a child who can't walk yet. He stretched out his head and called to the cabbage seller passing by. As for how much cabbage costs per pound, you can't hear it. He stretched out his head and called to the cabbage seller passing by. As for how much cabbage costs per pound, you can't hear it. The car is already far away, and you don't need to know. Food will definitely account for a certain amount of your monthly expenses. In that meal fee. Cabbage is such a small number. Could it be that if you knew how much a pound of cabbage sold at the door cost, would you really call your sullen cook to reprimand him and tell him that for every pound of cabbage he paid you an extra big buck? The road is getting better gradually. The high wall in front is a large government office. Here you are almost separated by windows. The high walls in this area are not ventilated. You don't know how many clerks there are and what they are doing, how many thick-browed and big-eyed people are yelling at the country people to do business and defraud them. How many wretches with sallow faces gave half a bowl of rice to the whole family? Deceiving yourself and others, what kind of tricks are you playing every day? But if there are really 2 or 3 people inside who are fighting desperately for a little convenience and justice for many people, you have no way of knowing. Having said so much, you are still sitting under the porch, with the noise of the stream coming from the window, and the smell of orchid smoke has long since disappeared. At this time, the 4 country people must have arrived in front of the upstream Qingyai mill. Yesterday, the mill boy there was so funny that he had flour all over his face. Let you look at the structure of the mill, the wooden wheel under the mill, the rotating stone mill in the house, and in the high and low courtyards, you can see farm tools that you have never seen before, under the shadow of the sun. Let you look at the structure of the mill, the wooden wheel under the mill, the rotating stone mill in the house, and in the high and low courtyards, you can see farm tools that you have never seen before, under the shadow of the sun. In the courtyard, there is an old locust tree, a clump of bright miscellaneous flowers, and a winding ditch that diverts water, and the waiters chatted in a friendly manner. He told you in a Shaanxi accent that more than 5,000 bags of wheat flour can be produced there a year, and each bag costs about 2 yuan. He also said that in the past 10 years, many mills have been closed due to the sudden loss of mountains and rivers in this area, and foreigners have rented those mills as their summer villas. Ashamed, you said that you lived in a mill. He put a smile on his face, letting the stars of flour shine in the sun, and said that he recognized it. It turns out that the owner of the mill you rented, a foreign priest, treated this village very well. He was kind, and the country people still had good feelings for him. An acre of land. The harvest is not bad every year. There is a special wall at the door of every house, like a small fortress. It was used to prevent bandits at that time. There are large lacquered wardrobes and suitcases in the house, and the white copper on the cabinet doors is brightly polished. The quilts on the kong are also very bright red and green. The harvest is not bad every year. There is a special wall at the door of every house, like a small fortress. It was used to prevent bandits at that time. There are large lacquered wardrobes and suitcases in the house, and the white copper on the cabinet doors is brightly polished. The quilts on the kong are also very bright red and green. But it is said that there has been no opera singing, although the stage is still facing the main hall majestically. The village has become poor in recent years, and a grandson of the prince told you that singing opera is too expensive, especially if the money is paid by the superiors. It's warm and necessary. In the middle of the street with lots of cars and horses, 2 people suddenly rush out from beside your car, a man and a woman. Each one picked up his feet and ran quickly. What's this for, you think to yourself, as the tram takes a sharp turn. The 2 men were chasing the tram and passing by the track. While chasing, they were talking to the ticket seller on the tram. It's not easy to catch the train. When you are in a foreign car, you really can't help but feel worried about rushing around in the street to catch the car. But you also know that if they don't make it this time, they can stand on the street for half an hour, those who would rather wait for a fortune than hire a foreign car. That is because their lives require them to calculate and save the difference in price between a foreign car and a tram. Unexpectedly, no matter where you go, you will always be sitting inside a window. It is true that many fashionable scholars often proudly carry the air of investigation. Putting on scientific glasses, I accidentally walked to a strange place and took a look, but the invisible window still existed. At this moment, the foreign car is running very fast, and you are constantly questioning the purpose of your trip, and what necessary goods you have purchased. Seeing men and women crowding in the market, one comes out of the door and goes in, holding packages in their hands. Although not all of them are what they need for the day, if there is a box of slightly luxurious items among them, it must also be a shining joy in their lives. Contact and acquaintance are really out of the question, and the leisure life you are blessed with will not allow you to do so. It's the same as traveling, if what you carry on your back is not a camera but a little capital for business. It must also be a shining joy in their lives. Contact and acquaintance are really out of the question, and the leisure life you are blessed with will not allow you to do so. It's the same as traveling, if what you carry on your back is not a camera but a little capital for business. You need to be full of energy to walk. You have to pay attention to the place where you stay. You have to calculate the cost of each sesame seed cake and a few sand nuts you eat along the way. You need to greet your peers cautiously and show sincerity to each other, and when you encounter difficulties it's good to look after and help each other. When you arrive at a place, you are really taking your whole flesh and blood body everywhere to try your luck. The tense situation does not allow you not to struggle and not to come into contact with other struggling flesh and blood until experience makes you understand. All the moving colors, sounds, and tastes of life are all there. It's not that you can't see it, it's just that it's always outside your window. I blame heaven for doing such weird things. The good and beautiful rice and wheat need manure to water them. I blame the country people for not being afraid of smells and dirt, so I invented 2 baskets, put them on the cart in front of my nose, and pushed them slowly. You blame the city administrators for not taking things seriously, and the old habits that are so dirty, smelly, and unhygienic cannot be improved. Is there really nothing you can do about the dung trucks in the past 10 years? Because the strong stench is not far enough from your window, you think about how to handle social sanitation services. If your ancestor is the emperor's direct brother, you will not, nor want to, forget it. It is said that King Qingsheng is the younger brother of Yongle, and everyone in Zhaozhuang village is his descendant. But just because they remembered it so clearly, the emperors of the other dynasty were a little worried. During Yongjing's reign, they were ordered to change their surname from Zhu to Lu, but they also used the method of ranking them in 20-digit numbers so that they would not mistake them for being descendants of this lineage. Hundreds of miles of plain land and countless areas of rolling mountains were reflected in your eyes from the window yesterday. It was a place where so many lives were active day and night. For every green millet, someone had sweated. For every yellow grain, someone had eaten it. There were also twists and turns, excitement and tension. But you may not be able to see it, because of all the twists and turns and excitement. Nervousness is all playing out outside your window. At home, when you sit in the study, the scenery outside the window is limited. There are 2 tassel trees and a few lilac trees there, a large branch of eucalyptus leaves spread out in the wind. Due to lack of sunlight, only 2 or 3 crabapples bloom every year. The leaves are full of scars from insects and ants, and are still curled up with a little brown edge. The corridor is open like a fan, with hexagonal lattice windows, letting in the sunlight and noise from the outer courtyard. When the coal messenger comes, you may see 1 or 2 faces stained black by coal. Some rice was delivered, a man carrying a large bag on his back, walking slowly through the screen door. There was also running water, and a person from the electric light and telephone company came to collect the bill, with a leather bag hanging diagonally on his chest, pushing a bicycle in his hand. Sometimes the cook comes over with a friend, with a smile on his face. Okay. Some rice was delivered, a man carrying a large bag on his back, walking slowly through the screen door. There was also running water, and a person from the electric light and telephone company came to collect the bill, with a leather bag hanging diagonally on his chest, pushing a bicycle in his hand. Sometimes the cook comes over with a friend, with a smile on his face. Okay. You walked into the concierge. Zhao Ma's husband came to get the money, which is not bad at all on the 1st of every month. You walked into the concierge. Zhao Ma's husband came to get the money, which is not bad at all on the 1st of every month. When he came early, you heard the sound of the 2 people quarreling. The row of hard-working faces on the bus the day before yesterday. When you arrive on the busy street, you are still as if you are watching a play in a special box. You don't know how to do it, and you don't have to participate in the play. Leaning on the railing, you are appreciating the aesthetics, and you have plenty of leisure. But if a rickshaw driver here asks you where you got off, you will be surprised. He didn't know the answer in a hurry. You don't lack anything that is most necessary for life, and your activities are unnecessary. When I looked up, I saw people in the middle of the street and in front of the shops across the street. They were all in a hurry, purchasing the necessities for their lives within the constraints of time and money. You curse city life, unnatural city life. Purchasing the necessities for their lives within the constraints of time and money. You curse city life, unnatural city life. I checked my luggage and said, let's go. I really can't bear this dull and lifeless life. I want to live a different life. A healthy trip can not only see the scenic spots of mountains, rivers and ancient temples, but also learn about the simple people and customs in the mainland. After leaving, the weather is not too bad, and it is worth traveling for 6 weeks a month. You get frustrated, put down your pen and say, what kind of life is this? A healthy trip can not only see the scenic spots of mountains, rivers and ancient temples, but also learn about the simple people and customs in the mainland. After leaving, the weather is not too bad, and it is worth traveling for 6 weeks a month. You get frustrated, put down your pen and say, what kind of life is this? You stand up. Wear shoes and socks that are not too expensive, but the price of this pair of shoes and socks is only, no matter what, someone's monthly salary must be only half of this price or even less. You are still sitting inside the window, not a train window or a car window. It's the window of an inn where you go against your travels, or it's the window you're used to invisibly, putting you inside. You went out to hire a foreign truck. Of course the price negotiated by the driver was much higher than the price. Did you just agree like a fool? No, 32 sons. If you pull it, pull it. If you don't pull it, pull it down. If you pull it, pull it. If you don't pull it down. I also know in my heart that if you really want to be an expert, you should say, 26 sons, just pull it, but you have the nerve to argue. Didn't you hear that person say? The straw hat inside costs 85 cents a dollar, which is a bit expensive, but really good. He lifted his hatbox and greeted his friend. He touched his shaved head, and a smile filled his face. The gleaming joy at that time was of course his enjoyment, without any doubt, because God knows how many times he had practiced self-denial and frugality in this year, which enabled him to earn this happy life. Bold luxury. So the argument between the 2 sides was heated and necessary, and everyone's voice was louder. The woman's face turned red, and a strand of hair fell down, and she grabbed it with her hands. The guy remained polite and shouted, can't be wrong, can't be wrong. 2 women were busy supervising the store clerk's scales. Don't worry about the 2 kilograms and 40 taels. Anyway, from the serious looks on the 2 women's faces, it must be something of great importance, a life-threatening commodity. And if the scale is less, the 2 women must feel great pain because of the loss. If the scale is longer, then the man knows that the loss is really not small for the boss these days. No matter where your window looks. Most of what you see is still outside your window, the partition glass, or the iron screen. You vaguely see some colors and hear some sounds. If you are satisfied privately, it doesn't matter. Most of what you see is still outside your window, the partition glass, or the iron screen. You vaguely see some colors and hear some sounds. If you are satisfied privately, it doesn't matter. God knows that's a sin. You must never learn from the shallowness of the foreign devils. If you don't believe me, check their luggage. If anyone doesn't bring canned food, a cot, and other odds and ends that prove you're still inside your window, touch their purse. There can't be any money there. Once you get to a place, you have a small world. You are confused here. Forget it, forget it. You are just sitting in your window, but it is in vain that you look at things outside the window, and most of them you don't understand. I won't understand either. To commemorate the 4th anniversary of Shima's death. Today is the 4th anniversary of your leaving this world. My friend, what can we do to commemorate you this time? The first 2 times, I sentimentally surrounded your photos with fragrant flowers, suppressing the sighs and sadness in my throat. I won't understand either. To commemorate the 4th anniversary of Shima's death. Today is the 4th anniversary of your leaving this world. My friend, what can we do to commemorate you this time? The first 2 times, I sentimentally surrounded your photos with fragrant flowers, suppressing the sighs and sadness in my throat. Friends looked at each other boredly, completing a form of commemoration, which seemed like a stupid failure. Because at that time, the behavior that was close to sadness but not religiously solemn had no other effect except to highlight the distance between you and us, the gap between life and death. It almost completely fails to achieve any real commemorative significance. Last year today I unexpectedly passed by your hometown from southern Zhejiang. In the gloomy night, I stood outside the train door and stared at the gloomy platform, silently recalling many discontinuous fragments of the past. Until the world between life and death becomes a blur, and life is like a train, a series of questions running through the vastness. I think of your. The train caught the rails and ran in the dark dash. Over mountains, over rivers, over. Until the world between life and death becomes a blur, and life is like a train, a series of questions running through the vastness. I think of your. The train caught the rails and ran in the dark dash. Over mountains, over rivers, over. Indirectly, you let the natural rhythm, color, and the gentle breeze and white moonlight come from time to time. All human emotions without rules are still continuing to exist among us intermittently, still intertwining with us the disputes of this life, and continuing the ideal of life. It seems that the motivation of the person who wrote the poem is so simple and pitiful. It is exactly as you said in the preface. We are all kind-hearted beings under the control of others. Although some poets have embraced the artistic and ideological impulses of most people or the entire era because their achievements are particularly high and broad, they have since cast a mysterious halo among people, making poet. We are all kind-hearted beings under the control of others. Although some poets have embraced the artistic and ideological impulses of most people or the entire era because their achievements are particularly high and broad, they have since cast a mysterious halo among people, making poet. These 2 words have a sublime color to them. In this way, those who strive to use verse to express or describe the intertwined emotions and thoughts of people and nature are regarded as flags of exaggeration by human prejudices and need to be extinguished by the extremely cold ridicule and distrust of contemporaries. To save human dignity and health. Speaking of your poems, my friend, I am just about to say something more serious to you. Don't be impatient, we will have to make this clear sooner or later. As for the technical issues of your poems, your artistic attainments. While this new poetry is still trying to hesitantly, no one can make a firm conclusion, but there is one thing I would like to describe to those who are discussing new poetry now. While this new poetry is still trying to hesitantly, no one can make a firm conclusion, but there is one thing I would like to describe to those who are discussing new poetry now. New poetry is so broad that it has almost no definite definition due to its unconditional and unstructured era. In this era, discuss appearance content. As a result, the period of artistic technical issues such as the organization of syllables, rhymes, chapters, images, etc. was based on those poems that had tried hard in this regard. Your first 2 poetry collections provided the basis for the most material for these discussions. Simply put, friends, your motivation for writing poetry is honest and involuntary, and your attitude towards writing poetry is honest, brave, and stubborn. When discussing your poems, everyone should understand this first. Now that you are gone, these things have gradually become blurred in people's memories. Your poems and essays are also scattered in various small collections, and they are buried in the back of new books with very fresh covers. When anyone talks about you, they either admit vaguely that you were a force in the past, or they look down upon you because they can be picky. Poetry is the skill, prose writers rarely mention it, maybe. Essayists are not as glorious as poets and are not worthy of note. At this time, I was completely confused. I am accustomed to say that everything is like the will of creation and is ultimately fate, but we know that everything seems to have our own shadow imprinted in it. I also know that every day is a pattern made up of many chances and coincidences, but I also wonder who is in charge of the arrangement. I can hardly find a word to say at this moment, because, really, I am just completely confused. I feel that life is as incomprehensible as death. Friends, there is nothing we can do about it, but I am not discouraged at all because I have my faith. My friend, I know you have never cared about this. You have experienced a lot of people's shallow honesty or meanness, and you have never been angry. And you always express mercy and forgiveness. Your mood is always so pure. Your head is always raised so high. Your heart is always so complete sincerity. Your arms always have so much indomitable courage. Friend, you say it yourself, if you were sitting in my position now. Facing the sun in this window, watching the shadows of chrysanthemums depicting patterns on the wall, leaning on 2 stacks of this morning's newspapers under my arms, hearing the faint sound of target shooting bullets outside Chaoyang Gate from time to time, consciously and subconsciously, to understand the mystery of life and death, what kind of poem should you write? In memory of a deceased friend? In memory of a deceased friend? According to my opinion, death is a chapter of tragedy, and life is the backbone of a tragedy. The characters in our group of dramas have contradictory personalities, reason and emotion are incompatible, ideals and reality collide face to face, causing sadness from one side or the other. The days move forward day by day. Yesterdays and yesterdays pile up and blend into an unavoidable background, making the walls or air around us so solid and so ethereal, making each of us stand at every moment of every day. Everything here is so important. So insignificant and incompetent again. I still remember that when you wanted to publish a collection of poems, I felt a lot of sweat for you. To be honest, I felt embarrassed for you among the literary seniors. I also remember that when I first heard that you were approached to run the Morning Post supplement, I have anxiety. But you actually put on a straight face and grabbed 2 drumsticks to open the way for literature and art, even sweeping the floor and spreading flowers. You ignored the criticism of the old forces and the suspicion of the new forces. Jean, it will be rare elsewhere in the future. I think our motivation for writing poetry is as simple and sincere as mentioned before, because at a certain time or moment, we are keenly exposed to the edge of life, or accidentally encounter the clouds and stars on the peak of ideals, we can't help but feel, in the language we are used to. We compose 1 or 2 strings of sentences that are close to music to comfort ourselves, liberate ourselves, and pursue the surreal beauty. We compose 1 or 2 strings of sentences that are close to music to comfort ourselves, liberate ourselves, and pursue the surreal beauty. Most of the readers of poetry must have the same honest and naive reactions as us who write poems. They just want to express themselves in our sentences. In the middle is the joy of music. Come into contact with some of the details of life mixed with beautiful longings, build a floating bridge with our emotions for their emotions, add some freshness to their lives with our inspiration, knead our pain and sorrow into their own melancholy comfort. I see a person living his life for a foolish and sincere tendency, putting the complex emotions he has experienced into the boiler of his own ideals and beliefs and burning them into a few melodious and sonorous words, even if it is sing a few times. To satisfy his own instinctive artistic impulse, this is a very common thing. There are always such people in every place and in every era. Most people who take turns to be this kind of person are because their emotions are richer and more sensitive than ordinary people. And the impulse for this emotion is even more unrealistic, or not entirely practical, pursuit. It just needs the satisfaction of that kind of art. I admit that writing poetry is a bleak business, an activity that is isolated and struggling among people, but because I know it too clearly. With your simple beliefs and sincere attempts, you have fought for your peers, protected their emotional honesty, and praised their artistic creations. You have never sought vanity. I think you have always been very carefree and comfortable. Will our works last forever? It also depends on whether they will live in the hearts of people we have never known, readers of our works, lonely people scattered at all times and places who do not know each other. This kind of thing has its own laws. It doesn't require our concern. Your poems are as far as I know. They are still floating around here, and your shadow is tied to those poems in varying shades, and the other end is imprinted in the hearts of many strangers. Friends, don't underestimate this kind of indirect existence. There are many enthusiastic people who will exist for you. And it increases the awareness of life. What makes you sad is only your closest friends and those who work with the same interests. The fact that you are not among them will always be an emptiness that cannot be filled. It was then that I remember the train being slowly pulled out of the platform. As I progressed step by step, I also followed the sour poetry, the moan of the car, passing the wilderness, crossing the pond, passing the silent village. Arrived at the second stop half of my hometown. If my tears had involuntarily overflowed from my eyelashes at that time, I know you would forgive me. You should believe that I will not surrender to sorrow. I will always believe in being stubborn and loyal to life, even if life is like what you said below. You should believe that I will not surrender to sorrow. I will always believe in being stubborn and loyal to life, even if life is like what you said below. Just those 2 narrow lanes are regarded as rails. Carrying this weight, I feel as tired as a dream. As you said yourself, your head is full of blood, but you still never bowed your head. You yourself believe that a little bit of your soul is still struggling there, and you still want to make some noise under the heavy oppression of real life. As the foreign saying goes, the horse must be put in front of the carriage, isn't it? There are no results for some attempts put there. Theorists can't keep handing out a bunch of bad checks, can they? You yourself have not only been stubbornly trying to learn, but you have also used all your lively enthusiasm to encourage others to try and encourage the times to try. This kind of work is the most suspect of being in the limelight. Only you who are brave enough can take it down. You are not far from us. Your figure will always hang here and there, as erratic as when you were alive. Love stops when others don't expect it. The laughter that brings courage is always so loud, and there are also those poems that you chanted passionately or anxiously, one by one. They are still spinning in the hearts of many people. You said in the preface to Tiger Collection that there is nothing worse in the world than writing poetry, but you did not explain why writing poetry is such a tragic thing. Now let me make a footnote, okay? But the situation now is slightly different from before. Since you are no longer here, those who are your friends see you being misunderstood, and even abused, and sometimes I can't help but feel sorry for you. But I have to tell you. Although you have left our world of common activities for 4 years and have stopped being the main force in driving changes in events, no one can deny that you are still standing in our hazy background, indirectly serving as a force. Especially in terms of efforts and beliefs in literary and artistic creation. But what each of them holds in their hands is not like a purely literary scale. Some like you as a person, some question your private morality, some simply respect the thoughts and philosophy expressed in your poems. Some only like those weak and detailed sentences, and some every comment must involve the compliance of your personal life, or assert that you are frivolous, or cite you as extravagant and extravagant. But don't misunderstand that I am narrow-minded and regard irrelevant things as important. I also know that misunderstandings, misinterpretations, and insults are irrelevant, but friends, all of us need someone to understand us. When someone really understands us, even if it hurts and criticizes our weaknesses and mistakes, then the whole of us, but it adds even more meaning. A writer's overall achievement in literature and art requires a kind of peaceful judgment of essays on literature and art on art. This year it's today's turn again. The world is still in a mess, and in many places it is filled with dark clouds. I look forward to the opposite direction of ideals. I am not talking nonsense. When I write, faith is only a thin stick of incense. That bright idea can no longer withstand the west wind. The rustling sound blew through the sycamore trees. People say that the final conclusion has been made, but the former has long been a fact. The latter has been painful to say in the past 4 years. I have yet to give a single pertinent or honest review. Although the praise and criticism of you started 1 or 2 weeks after your death. After you left, everyone proposed to set up a Shimo Prize for you to continue your ambition of encouraging others to work hard on poetry and prose, which barely symbolized your enthusiasm for supporting literary and artistic creation. So that young people who don't recognize you will always retain affection for you. If you don't feel that this matter is too cold and not hot enough, I hope you will forgive your friends for their hard work, smile in the dark and give us the courage to do these stupid things. Spider silk and plum blossoms. It's really just 2 spider threads that gently lead from the door frame to a plum blossom. Just 2 filaments, shining in the sunlight. If there were more, would they still be decent? How can a modern family allow a cobweb to cause trouble in broad daylight, no matter how beautiful and mysterious it is? It's so delicate that you can think of everything, the miraculous craftsmanship and wonder of natural creation. These 2 threads should make people blush, and they are so special in winter. But it's bright and thin, a bit like silver, and a bit like glass filaments, so it's not really annoying. Especially they are so elegant and graceful, and they are leaning on the branches of plum blossoms intentionally or unintentionally. You look at the window, the winter sun shines all over the house, the windows are bright and clean, and every plum blossom is in bud, fully open. Especially they are so elegant and graceful, and they are leaning on the branches of plum blossoms intentionally or unintentionally. Emotions can't help but fill my mind in a confused and ethereal way, oscillating in that moment of time. As thin and unnecessary as a spider's thread, thoughts began to be thrown out, from the past to the future, conscious and unconscious, from the plum blossoms on the doorframe to the universe, with uncertain traces of floating clouds and waves. It's human nature and art. It's still philosophy. You have no time to care about it. You can't stop the overflowing of your emotions, the galloping of your thoughts. The spider silk plum blossoms can travel thousands of miles in an instant. This is not the first love, but the new love, a time when we are consciously reading the meaning of flowers. It's still philosophy. You have no time to care about it. You can't stop the overflowing of your emotions, the galloping of your thoughts. The spider silk plum blossoms can travel thousands of miles in an instant. This is not the first love, but the new love, a time when we are consciously reading the meaning of flowers. The difference in emotions is not limited to men and women. There are also great differences between the East and the West. Even if the emotions are basically the same, the symbols of the emotions, the things on which the emotions rest, and the things they rest on are often different. The connection between water and stars and Western emotions has long been a habit. A star twinkles in the blue sky, and a cold stream pours out a melancholy calm. It aroused the surge of poetry in them, and they sang sweetly and passionately in their hearts, Her eyes are like stars twinkling in the dusk sky, scattered by the pen edges of those goose feathers, or, bright as a single star, stars, shining in the late sky, or, how many times, beside the first flowing clear water. Sorrow leans on her downcast face. Cherishing flowers, understanding flowers is too oriental, being intimate and natural, containing the delicacy of human nature is the traditional oriental emotion. Remember, that is to say, plum blossoms and magnolias. At first, there was a friend said that when I first fell in love, the magnolias had just finished blooming, the weather was getting warmer every day, and I lived by the lake. Every night I walked in the woods by the lake, and sat quietly on a secluded rock to watch the lights on the other side. I felt that only by being so devoutly facing the bright blue stars in the distant city could I relax my inner emotions and put them in the most reliable and pure place. In a group of thoughts, there is no blasphemy or surprise that. It was the scene of a very young man's first love. The object was vague and lofty, but he pursued his self deeply. He asked about the girl's emotions. In addition, age and size. The same sadness, but leaping like joy. At the age of 16, the breeze was chaotic, not decadent, not empty. Standing on the feet of ideals, people are full of hope, but it is the same in the East and the West. When people get old, they often feel sad and complain, which damages the liveliness of poetry. People like Xiangshan, Jishuan, Dongpa, Fangweng's white hair rarely fail to stand out in poetry, or at least are unpleasant. That's a long way from saying it. I just said it was about cherishing flowers. Young and old in the East are all unavoidable in this hobby. It does not matter whether the old man drags his stick with snow on his temples. The most cherished flowers are the spring reds, such as crabapples. They are so delicate and bright, and they bloom all over the red ground, which arouses sympathy and sadness. But even though we have the same flowers in the West, we still lack our verandas and courtyards. With How Deep is the Courtyard, there is a unique mood in the courtyard. If Li Ian's slanting wind and drizzle wasn't a heavy door must be closed underneath, it wouldn't be as deep and lovely as Depression. Li Hoju's Who Will Come All Day also has a unique feeling of loneliness. To see the flowers, you need to be in the courtyard, and you are deeply locked in the understanding. From time to time, there are window railings to give you a little support, although there is no need to lean on the 12 railings, which is so weak and boring. Let's take plum blossoms as an example. Strings of bright red stamens are decorated on the elegant and proud bones. They are the cutest and most admirable. When the half-flowered stamens are scattered on the old branches, your heart will beat. The plum blossoms are most afraid of blooming. When they bloom, there will be nothing to say. Strings of bright red stamens are decorated on the elegant and proud bones. They are the cutest and most admirable. When the half-flowered stamens are scattered on the old branches, your heart will beat. The plum blossoms are most afraid of blooming. When they bloom, there will be nothing to say. Simply disabled, the scent of the fragrance spreads and the fire in the night becomes a kind of gentle desolation. Therefore, when you are not in love, the most natural object is flowers. It is not the emotion that arises because of flowers. There is no emotion at the age of 16. It is just the emotion of conscious interpretation of flowers that I just mentioned, which is placed on that beautiful and speechless thing. Your heart is broken by its unique charm and aloofness, and you are moved by the flower. To be honest, it's not a bad thing if you fall in love with the same flower. The surprise and ecstasy will not be less than that of first love. And that gaze, that contemplation. Of course, there is too much sadness in old poetry. A poem is like a beautiful security that can be cashed in according to the market price. Therefore, the flowers in the garden are red in disorder, dusk and loneliness are too much, and the poems often lose their honesty. In Western poetry, love always stands in the front, either forgetting or remembering. The moon is for love, and the flowers are also for love. As long as it is all true love, it is not too boring. Let's talk about the good things on both sides. Comparing their moonlight with our moonlight, it seems that the moonlight is much more profound. Not to mention flowers. Our flowers are not ready to be picked and decorated into bouquets or corollas to present to lovers. Instead, they are graceful and individual, standing in the position of lovers and accepting love songs. Right here, I suddenly remembered plum blossoms. One or two branches, old branches and thin branches, lying horizontally, curling, tracing shadows, and spraying fine fragrance. The sun spreads on the floor with a faint golden color, the walls are decorated with flowers, and the books and bookmarks on the bookshelf seem to be speaking out. The small couplets on the wall are from which I can't remember whose poems. The middle section is a poem by Dongpa. You held your breath, barely daring to breathe, raised your feet, and your small figure was embedded in the middle of the study. Looking at the afterglow through the window and the swaying shadows of the flowers, you feel like you have lost something and are a little confused. It's strange that Dongfang is looking for someone with intention, which is a bit out of ideas. Romance, extreme romance. Looking at the afterglow through the window and the swaying shadows of the flowers, you feel like you have lost something and are a little confused. It's strange that Dongfang is looking for someone with intention, which is a bit out of ideas. Such a beautiful girl, who can understand the meaning of the flower. You become even more silent, feeling the loneliness of the flower almost passionately, and begin to pity the flower, giving all your sympathy to the flower's heart poetically. It's like you are a spider, and there are also flowers around you. Such a beautiful girl, who can understand the meaning of the flower. You become even more silent, feeling the loneliness of the flower almost passionately, and begin to pity the flower, giving all your sympathy to the flower's heart poetically. It's like you are a spider, and there are also flowers around you. The spider web you weave yourself draws the heaven and earth meticulously. No matter how many times the wind and rain blow it off, you will not stop this basic activity in life. At this moment, a branch is tilted, but the fragrance is unknown. A spider's thread. Memory is also the same spider thread. It is pulled out from the plum blossom branches after being hooked on the plum blossom. Although it has not been woven into a dense web, this poetic front and back. That is, the emotional connection that took place more than 10 years apart. The afternoon sun still shines slantingly, the courtyard is quiet, with few shadows. The window lattice and plum blossoms in the room still form a pattern together. The two spider silks can still be regarded as a miracle in winter. When you look at them, they look a bit like silver. It's also a bit like glass. It just hangs so obliquely on the branches of plum blossoms. 25 New Year's Notes. Notes on selecting topics for novels in literary and art series. Tuck Hung Pao Literary Supplement has been published for more than a year, and now I want to present the short stories that were created in this first year and select a few. Printed in a single volume to provide readers with more convenient reading. This work should indeed please both the serious writer and the reader. There are not many articles here, and the number of people is not large, but gathered together in a small anthology, it is still solid and full. Holding it in your hands can fill you with joyful hope. Apart from the above-mentioned preference for subject matter, there is no doubt about the seriousness of creating literature and art. Holding it in your hands can fill you with joyful hope. Apart from the above-mentioned preference for subject matter, there is no doubt about the seriousness of creating literature and art. Now it has been invisibly kicked out of the door of those who worked hard to create it, and it is declining and almost extinct. This situation is indeed a good phenomenon worthy of congratulations from us authors and readers. The coherence of the whole text, the economy of words, the arrangement of key points, and the vividness of colors and pictures has become a very common standard. In each article, we believe that readers will not fail to notice the benefits, and these places give the editors a lot of happiness and hope. This kind of creation is a waste of words to exaggerate hypocritical situations and sadness. Those serious readers who want to enrich their lives and understand life through literature and art will naturally feel very impatient and disappointed. This tendency is not accidental. To say the best, it is because our era has strong sympathy and concern for them, farmers and laborers. To say the worst, it is a phenomenon of blindly following trends. But the fairest thing to say is that the above two reasons are somewhat related. When describing labor society, rural color has become a trend, and it has also achieved some success in the literary and art circles. A beginning writer, or a writer with a weak personality. It is easy to unconsciously follow various existing styles and write. Many people feel guilty that their lifestyle is not new, so they deliberately choose some special romantic themes that they are not familiar with. Then he blackmails his limited imagination to show off emotions he doesn't have, and deceives readers' sympathy. As for the technical level and averageness of the short stories here, the editor and selector would like to ask readers to pay attention without hesitation. Undoubtedly, in terms of structure and description. In the distribution of narrative and dialogue, most authors have used it very maturely and naturally. Jerky, childish, lengthy, and rambling works, which were unashamedly scattered in various printed matter in the early days of the new literature and art, have now completely disappeared. The richness of life does not lie in the variety of ways of living. For example, I have been an apprentice, pulled a foreign truck, been to Gansu and Yunnan, but my objective observation and subjective perception are sharp and agile at the same time, and I can understand in many aspects. And taste what you see, hear, and encounter. A variety of different situations, you have to understand the relationship and involvement of people in life, the dramatic changes between fixed and accidental, and finally, you have to have your own special views and thoughts, beliefs, or philosophies. Now let's take the editor's reflections on these many works as a reference for readers when browsing and reviewing this anthology. It is simply a few comments below. In the end, if it's not too far off topic. We also want to talk more specifically about our views on the author and the work. The so-called honesty does not mean that the author must actually experience the life mentioned in the work, but that all the lives mentioned in the work are indeed understood by the author intellectually. Situations or human nature that can be experienced emotionally. Therefore, in addition to the technical knowledge of using words, an author must be able to stand on any life, be able to advance and retreat intellectually between subjectivity and objectivity, between feeling and understanding, and be emotionally unrestrained. Memory and fantasy are intertwined and complementary, to the extent that truth is false and false is true, and only then is there vitality and sincerity in his writing. Only then will his works be substantial and great, unaffected by subject matter or words, and able to be lasting and universally moving. We hope that the anthology can reveal this lack of creativity or artistic impurity at this point, and stimulate the writers themselves to be more individual and more enthusiastic in depicting this multifaceted and complicated life, without being limited to any one angle. We are not afraid that after reading this book, the hopes raised may turn into disappointment. Because this disappointment may be unavoidable. If the reader sincerely holds great ideals about the world of creation, he will already have extraordinary hopes in his heart. Especially in our era, young writers are very sad that they are enjoying material advantages and are superior to the less educated people, so they naturally want to understand the poverty in the countryside and become interested in the remote hinterland. Instead, they put aside the things they are familiar with. Life is not written. Taking individual articles as an example, many are well written, and some are particularly brilliant. However, judging from the overall experience in the creative world, this tendency indicates weakness and lack of creative power. And if you write for conscience reasons, the artistic content of the work will be questioned. If we look at this small situation from a bird's eye view, at least one of the most remarkable phenomena is unfolding before our eyes. If we look at this small situation from a bird's eye view, at least one of the most remarkable phenomena is unfolding before our eyes. Among these works, there seems to be a very biased tendency in the choice of subject matter. That is the description of the life of rural or less educated people or laborers. In terms of description, we feel that most of the methods used are to write a story, either with one or two characters as the center, or with the beginning and end of an incident in a certain place as the main body, with simple development and ending. This is also a relatively weak approach. We suspect that this may be because many authors misunderstand the limitations of the short story and view its possibilities too narrowly. Few people try to take a bold cross-section of life, and few people do it seriously to reveal the contradictions of personal life. This is also a regret among us. The most important thing about the work is honesty. The importance of honesty lies in the freshness of the subject matter, the integrity of the structure, and the fluency of the writing. That is, the work must be honest to the author's objective understanding and subjective experience of life. Even if the scenes in the novel are entirely fictitious, the emotions in the content must all be based on real and experienced emotions, and empty falsehoods must not be used to support the sad plot. Even if the scenes in the novel are entirely fictitious, the emotions in the content must all be based on real and experienced emotions, and empty falsehoods must not be used to support the sad plot. But as long as it's honest reactions from readers, we're not afraid. Because here are a bunch of honest achievements by the author, which together represent a year of experiments in the creative world. No matter what standards are used to measure it and judge its success or failure, no one can say a word. A person who lives a rich life has no longer objectively seen several things. And in people who can subjectively inspire very complex and very different emotions, and who can sympathize with many aspects of human nature. And in people who can subjectively inspire very complex and very different emotions, and who can sympathize with many aspects of human nature. Of course, readers understand these principles better than authors, so the valuation of works is always in the hands of serious readers. This is one of the reasons why this anthology has to be printed and dedicated to its impartial judges. What on earth happened? What is writing poetry all about? Writing poetry can be said to be about grasping a momentary flash of power while following the ups and downs of the subconscious mind. Explore the lingering and focused emotions in your heart, joy, sorrow, love, whether they are deep or shallow, lingering or passionate. On the other hand, you can follow your intuition, recognize and discern the taste in front of you or in your memory. The images encountered by the senses, colors, shapes, sounds, movements, may be delicate, intimate, or majestic. Or strange. On the other hand, we pursue rational exploration, analysis, and understanding of the emotions generated by the fusion and interweaving of these different natures, different weights, and uncertain emotional images, and then use language and words, using their sound meanings, to manage, describe, and express this inner image. Emotions, understanding the waves of adaptation or contradiction at the same time, or emotions, understanding the waves of adaptation or contradiction at the same time or at different times. This flash of sentiment, the step of inspiration, comes lightly, just like the gentle and smooth gurgling water, washing naturally, infiltrating the emotions of everything, reflecting the moon, and singing after a dream. The sense of beauty stirs up a kind of unrealistic waiting, which can be expressed into a long song with 1,000 lines of generous and lingering words, and can leave behind a few lines of poetry like a sigh. The joyful voice and the light pictures in the heart are often like birds singing and falling flowers. The breeze is full of the moon, mixed with the colorful emotions, tears stained by laughter, unrestrained and light. Whether intentionally or unintentionally, it is left in various words and texts. This flash of realization may be chaotic and hazy, or it may be transparent and clear. Like light, it can illuminate insights at the same time, and it can also comprehend whether intentionally or unintentionally, it is left in various words and texts. This flash of realization may be chaotic and hazy, or it may be transparent and clear. Like light, it can illuminate insights at the same time, and it can also comprehend the various qualities of life that include all the tastes you have tasted, are still tasting, and the imaginary tastes. And it also activates the intricate and overlapping meanings between people and me. The source of poetry, as mentioned above, is the conscious and subconscious integration and exchange of intricate emotional images and concepts. Undoubtedly, the expression of poetry must be a language that integrates images, emotions, and thoughts. The reason why poetry happens is not to call it the coming of inspiration. The main thing is that the sudden flash of power or the coincidence of a magical moment brings all the complicated, poetic factors together in a moment of chance. Time. So the creation or completion of poetry. The main reason should also be found in the supernatural, coincidental, and accidental activities that are partly conscious, partly intuitive, and partly subconscious. The so-called wonderful is wonderful without words. The main reason should also be found in the supernatural, coincidental, and accidental activities that are partly conscious, partly intuitive, and partly subconscious. The so-called wonderful is wonderful without words. Reason and emotion, both clear and obscure, are not too far away. It's like people are confused about where they are coming from, but if there is a certain fate that can be found in the erratic situation, it is also like they are confused about why. But there are mottled and clear colors in the chaos, and emotions are interspersed and connected. The presence and absence of it give the vegetation climate and passion color. No matter what poem, it is never separated from metaphors and symbols, or metaphorical and symbolic language. Many of the images in the poem are not ordinary purely objective images. The clouds, stars, mountains, rivers, and trees in the poem often have human feelings, and at the same time, the inner human feelings turn into external physical images. Although they are simple and superficial, they are all different from subtle and complex. But although poetry cannot lack metaphors and symbols, symbols and metaphors are not poetry. We have long ago admitted that poetry cannot exist without symbols and metaphors. In poetry, emotions must be attached to images and seek more concrete expression. The image must be clear or calm, appropriately highlight the emotion and represent the meaning. We only heard the poet himself say that a strange wind blew by, or a clear moonlight, a surprise, and vibration of the soul, and he began to try to write poetry, obsessed with artistic conception, words. The battle of music, but what is this supernatural wind and moon, the vibration and surprise of the soul? Is it still the activity that can be traced to inner intuition, to the intricately communicated emotions and images behind the subconscious, to the rational thoughts and feelings on the conscious level? And the instinctive urge to perform? The supernatural wind and moon should refer to an accidental phenomenon in the outside world, but at the same time they also mean that they are a kind of fuse for inner activities. The poet never speaks without metaphor. After all, God knows what writing poetry is all about. When writing a poem, it may be, I know, God knows, after writing it, it is best to imitate Browning's self-deprecation without avoiding suspicion, and just admit, God knows, and all the lawsuits about writing poetry will be saved. If this still needs explanation, common sense, we can ask. At a time when consciousness, intuition, senses, emotion, and reason are all given equal importance at the same time, one or two concise sentences are needed to represent the subtle connections between a bunch of overlapping external images and inner emotions and thoughts, while at the same time without losing the original emotional quality. At a time when consciousness, intuition, senses, emotion, and reason are all given equal importance at the same time, one or two concise sentences are needed to represent the subtle connections between a bunch of overlapping external images and inner emotions and thoughts, while at the same time without losing the original emotional quality. Is it easy or possible? In this coincidental moment, emphasis on the coincidence, all your intuition, reason, senses, emotions, memories, and fantasies, independently and interactively, burst out with their unusual sharpness and intensity. Is it easy or possible? In this coincidental moment, emphasis on the coincidence, all your intuition, reason, senses, emotions, memories, and fantasies, independently and interactively, burst out with their unusual sharpness and intensity. Strong, magnificent, and deep. Between their subconscious flows, independent or interactive fusions, there emerge, accidentally but inevitably, flashes of insight, interest, or so-called inspiration, or an intimate sense of one's own joys and sorrows. Or the vast nature of the universe, or the wisdom of history and humanity. Because we believe that poetry is the satisfaction of such a complex series of multifaceted conditions, we cannot help but doubt the inability of pure consciousness, rationality, or technical creation, or the so-called work. Writing poetry can be said to be about one's own emotions. What is subjectively experienced and understood and what is rationally and objectively observed and discerned reach a level at the same time, overflowing, and play a role in each other regardless of host or guest, due to instinctive impulse and a kind of innate interest. And dexterity, control a string of sounds and pictures. Emotional words are used to express the close connection between the inner heart and external objects, as well as the resulting understanding or state. Writing poetry, or it can be said that after some subconscious brewing, suddenly realizing such a coincidental moment in life, coincidentally. It is supernatural and cannot be your own, flowing with a strong or deep emotion, gathering complex and evolving emotions, or even condensing into a simple and outstanding artistic conception, and instinctively forcing you to depict a kind of artistic conception. Suitable expression. This expression is positive. It's like crying and sighing, singing and cheering, dancing and performing. Passively, it's like being in a quiet place, meditating to oneself. In other words, the combination of the two means being innocent and unrestrained, confessing passionately to invite sympathy and understanding, but at the same time being lonely and silent. Keep to yourself to maintain your leisurely perfection and seriousness. Writing poetry can be said to be deft and sincere without knowing why. When translating to the ideal sympathizer, the emotions flowing in one's heart pass through the complex images. Talisman that is spied upon by reason and recorded separately by intuition and consciousness. On the one hand, it seems to be a bleak operation, at least it is a sincere tribute. On the other hand, it seems that the master of writing with spirit came by chance with the help of ordinary inadvertent preparations, loyal to emotion and loyal to image. More loyal to the series of feelings that flashed through my heart in an instant. Write poetry. However, if the flash of sentiment is strong and intense, it can be like a stormy sea with flying sand. It can be seen from the big and small, and it can be seen from the thin object to change. The universe and life can be like a puzzle. Everything is as if it has been tempered by burning fire, dispersed and reduced into a pure flame temperament, and all emotional images rise into the realm of fantasy, mystery, change and uncertainty, or remain unchanged, absolute and eternal. Extraordinary and mysterious, seemingly distant from human nature. Those who experience it may be passionate and enlightened, or they may be peaceful and distant, and they will inevitably struggle with the creation of super emotions, super images, and even superverbal, heart-to-heart creations. Obscure and confusing, such as Zen verses and mysterious poems, they are inevitably reborn in words that are almost inappropriate for the fantasy realm, and their right to survival is assessed. But this kind of language cannot be just language, it must also be an expression similar to movements. This expression cannot be just an expression, but must be a communication of understanding concepts. At the same time, it must constantly translate emotions, describe phenomena, and interpret perceptions. It is not a body but needs to create body and color, it is a sound, but at most it only needs to maintain long and short rhythms. The most important thing is to follow the rapid high and low, and the limited sonorous tone, attached to a string of independent or connected word meanings. It must give intuitive consciousness, emotion and reason, and overall happiness. A good poem in front of an understanding reader can sometimes be a miracle. However, the sad and smooth, extravagant images and painted emotions are connected by artificial means, and if you look at it casually, it might not look like poetry. Pretending to be profound and profound, the poem reverses the images and piles up many metaphors. It can also be shocking. A metaphor or a symbol can be extremely simple in terms of literal words or things, and at the same time, it can carry sounds, colors, and shapes other than literal things, causing associations with their relationships with other things. This method can assist in many ways to understand the true meaning of each sentence, and also increase the stimulation and satisfaction of every aspect of the senses, emotions, and intelligence. The reason is very obvious. What writing poetry is all about, really only God knows best. Readers and writers, readers and readers. History tells me that the opinions of authors about poetry are always divided and quarreled to no end. Because to be honest, no one still knows what writing poetry is about, except for what is expressed in this text, which is barely expressed by many abstract nouns. Some specific metaphors are used to describe that special kind of intuitive activity, providing an extremely unsatisfactory answer. Each other. The friends met again, nodding and smiling. They knew that this year was no different from previous years, and that both of them had gained a lot of experience. Individually. Although everyone's experience during this time has a special shape and taste, it requires individual emotions to analyze and describe. Taken together, although everyone's experience during this time has a special shape and taste, it requires individual emotions to analyze and describe. Taken together, these many experiences are a whole confusion that seems to be of the same style, color, size, and weight. You touch that corner. When I met this person, the confusion still shrouded each other. When a strange city is pointed out on a map, there may be a huge distance between what you are passing through and what he is passing through, and the situation between you and him at that time may be completely different. But here, individual similarities and differences seem very irrelevant. All that matters is that you and I nod to each other, understand each other, and therefore smile at each other. That night in the middle of a certain river, on the deck of an incoming ship, among the hot and smelly crowds, he remembered how trapped, hungry, and embarrassed he felt at that time. What was swirling around his head was that reality but seemed to be an illusion, and the illusion became the murderous tool of the real mad enemy, an agile and modern aircraft, as beautiful as a fish or a bird. A sad smile is necessary here. For the same other person knows the horror of the primitive sudden arousal of pure muscular reflexes. These words may resonate with many heartstrings. I often think about where this simple emotion comes from. Belief? Like a stream flowing through consciousness. I began to understand that besides reason and passionate impulse, there was also a source of pure strength. Confidence generates strength and also saves strength. At this time, I sighed, because although everything was small, it was definitely not the sentimentality I was familiar with before. I began to understand that besides reason and passionate impulse, there was also a source of pure strength. Confidence generates strength and also saves strength. At this time, I sighed, because although everything was small, it was definitely not the sentimentality I was familiar with before. Every experience has its own solid truth. There is no room for sighs. After being baptized by artillery fire or wandering, the sun and moon change again and again. Is there no trace of this experience on each other's faces? There is no room for sighs. After being baptized by artillery fire or wandering, the sun and moon change again and again. Is there no trace of this experience on each other's faces? But when the entire land is riddled with scars, and everyone is separated and lost, when you go to your hometown, you are far away, naturally. My heart is beautiful, but I am sad, and I don't know where it is. The words engraved on the faces did not surprise each other, so they just smiled. Now the life behind is slowed down, the emotions are tense, and the two sides the friction makes me depressed and unhappy, and I live in a state of incomprehension. My heart is beautiful, but I am sad, and I don't know where it is. The words engraved on the faces did not surprise each other, so they just smiled. Now the life behind is slowed down, the emotions are tense, and the two sides the friction makes me depressed and unhappy, and I live in a state of incomprehension. The long night is so full of people that I hide my sorrow and never go away. Or, I would rather die and be in exile. I can't bear to be worried about this all the time. Where is the main force supporting this day? You and I will live and die without examining its meaning in order to be arrogant. We also need some solid support. Now the problem at the rear. Where is the source of this power? Never rely on your usual balanced reason, that's not enough, God knows. Especially at this time, emotions are buoyant under the skin, as if what it needs is a superrational impulse. At this time I wiped the sweat from my forehead. I am almost aware of the lines around my mouth, and I respect that sweet and sour smile, because I understand that it is power. I know a person, an ordinary person living a very ordinary life during the national crisis, wrote to his friend and said that although his voice was always so dry and hoarse, but he had to tell his friends privately with a hoarse voice, he felt that no matter at this time, he lived with blood for this lovely old country, or died with blood or without blood, he felt glorious and strange. Ordinarily, he must now be satisfied with both, but he had to tell his friends privately with a hoarse voice, he felt that no matter at this time, he lived with blood for this lovely old country, or died with blood or without blood, he felt glorious and strange. Ordinarily, he must now be satisfied with both life and death. When life is so difficult and death is so easy, this is why we still smile and nod, right? Now that we share the same hardships in life, this faith is our most important connection at this time. If you don't believe me, if you ask him why he is still alive like this, his answer will naturally be your answer, too, if he asks you to. Thinking about it, neither of them remembers it too clearly, everything seems to be spinning in a blur, but who can forget the omentum, which is so close to the skin and full of worries? When thinking about many things, they are always so obscure in the process of thinking. When I understand them, it makes me laugh. What I think of is such a simple and obvious fact. If you are determined to live your life, you will not let it fail in small areas, gradually weakening, from sharp to dull, from tension to relaxation. You are even more grateful for the many ordinary and trivial frictions that pass through your nerves, muscles, or consciousness day and night. In the rear, things are not so simple. Life is still expanding and contracting slowly. The distance between food, accommodation, life and death is like a long shadow at dusk, long and stretching forward. It's like plunging into the night, and the same night dissolves into a blur. In the broad cycle of day and night, there are more intersperses. It is really that the world is endless and life is long and diligent. The interweaving of life is messy and trivial, with no special color or outline at all, let alone heroic elements. The spots are just like small blood rust condensing on life, marking life when you least expect it. On the front line, excitement and fatigue have been mixed with dust and blood to form the body and soul of another life. Between sleeping and waking, between hunger and eating, between life and death. The distance is almost non-existent. Life is just a force, death is a silent hatred, and things couldn't be simpler. Those who are still alive continue to be powerful, and those who are dead continue to accumulate into greater hatred. The distance is almost non-existent. Life is just a force, death is a silent hatred, and things couldn't be simpler. Those who are still alive continue to be powerful, and those who are dead continue to accumulate into greater hatred. Everything else is suspended tragically and passionately between these two. The sweet and sour lines on the edge of the mouth are carved by actual sorrow and joy, and are a kind of perseverance and resilience. Because life is neither a simple flame, it itself is very heavy and needs to be supported with resilience. The power to generate this resilient support is needed. A few sweet and sour lines are often added to the corners of the mouth to help each other chew their lives. Why not acquiesce to this point? When people are confused, they should laugh most. This kind of laughter, although it restrains nerves and muscles, is only the backbone of perseverance. It is necessary, just like protective color is necessary for many living things. Let's talk about the first day in a strange city. This experience is so common now, especially at night, except for individual situations and feelings. Isn't it a refreshing powder that everyone is familiar with that has been left in everyone's heart? Bitter and astringent, when the taste invades the spleen and stomach, a small chill will gently crawl across the back, without any sharp sentimentality. How long has faith been sitting among us? That confidence that cannot be replaced by reason or passion. How long has faith been sitting among us? Have you and I ever noticed it? Isn't the strength that faith gives us the same kind of perseverance and tenacity? We all believe that as long as we live or die faithfully for it. Our great country will move forward forever, from one era to another. He was also thinking about that time when he was sleeping in the open on a certain station platform. There was a moon in the sky, and there were people on the left and right. Our great country will move forward forever, from one era to another. He was also thinking about that time when he was sleeping in the open on a certain station platform. There was a moon in the sky, and there were people on the left and right. They were scattered like fallen leaves after being torn down by the wind and rain, curled up. They were all recalling the bombing by enemy planes that they had experienced for the first time that day. The conversation can be extended indefinitely, because now there are too many memories like this, more painful than this, in everyone's heart. Just mention a city or commercial port that everyone is familiar with, and what kind of final impression will come up with the plenum. Maybe he could say that when he entered such and such a city that night, he saw a row of sad lights in front of small shops, emitting a strange yellow halo. It made him feel a tingling sensation in his throat. What you remember is that the dim gas lamp behind a certain station shines into the unfamiliar street, making you feel like you are missing something. July. These two words are as powerful as the beginning of a historical song, August. September brought that wild wind, later. Then came the new year, that unforgettable New Year's Eve. It's January, February, March, July, and New Year's Eve again. Now January and February are beginning again. Who remembers best how this string of days continues? How has life changed? After the enemy opened fire at Lugo Bridge in July, the footprints across China's land were closely connected, adding to the evidence of China's vast territory. Everyone who has participated in the great rhythm flowing on this vast ground is concerned about dust and blood. Two very ordinary natural qualities that few people usually pay attention to, but now everyone in his own corner has a very intimate understanding of them. Every inch of soil, every drop of blood, these words are very real things that can be touched and controlled. It's not just a sentence or a concept. Needless to say, everything is so interconnected now, so common, and individual emotions are so irrelevant. The current hardships are not individual, but universal, filling an entire nation and an entire era. What we call life today will be history later. Objectively, there is no doubt that the hardships we are familiar with are unfolding in a big era. So don't miss the fact that we are nodding to each other now. And it is best for us to share the sweet and sour smile lines, powerfully and tenaciously. Across history. A piece of sunshine. After the holiday, the days in early spring are relaxing. The bright yellow sunlight at mid-afternoon penetrates horizontally through the window lattice into the room, shining brightly in all directions. I was a little dazed, and I was used to being surprised by the silence around me. I look at the sun's bright physique, as if to distinguish its intertwined and gorgeous colors, and to chase its traceless flow. When I saw it reflected cleanly on the desk, I felt that there was a kind of tranquility, a kind of spiritual exhilaration, and a sense of leisure spread on the desk, that is, the so-called. The window is bright and clean. There is a mysterious expectation silently kept there, and the atmosphere of poetry is blooming. There is no flower fragrance there, and the art decoration is just a very ordinary Eight Immortals table. The window is bright and clean. There is a mysterious expectation silently kept there, and the atmosphere of poetry is blooming. There is no flower fragrance there, and the art decoration is just a very ordinary Eight Immortals table. If my memory is correct, there is nothing on it. A long time ago, there was a display of salted fish and pickles are a very common and simple lunch. The child's heart was stunned. Perhaps his eyes were a little wider, looking around, as if looking for the answer to a question. Why is that patch of sunshine so beautiful? That pickles are a very common and simple lunch. The child's heart was stunned. Perhaps his eyes were a little wider, looking around, as if looking for the answer to a question. Why is that patch of sunshine so beautiful? That kind of silence. In the silence, one can seem to hear the stream of the tsong-tsong in that place, together with the intermittent sound of the piano, whispering the tones of a lonely person amusing himself. It was probably just 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and an 8 immortals table, where dinner had just been served, stood in the middle of it very lonely. Under the table, a piece of sunshine came in from the entrance of the hall, and fell there happily. An absolute silence surrounded by this silent golden crystal, for some reason, suddenly caused an extremely unusual oscillation in the heart of my 6-year-old child. Here I want to talk about the piece of sunshine that I first met. I was 6 years old that year, and I remember that it was just after I developed water drops. Water drops are common chickenpox, but in my hometown the dialect calls it water drops. At that time, I liked that beautiful name so much that forgetting it was a disease. Here I want to talk about the piece of sunshine that I first met. I was 6 years old that year, and I remember that it was just after I developed water drops. Water drops are common chickenpox, but in my hometown the dialect calls it water drops. At that time, I liked that beautiful name so much that forgetting it was a disease. Therefore, I also feel a mysterious pride. As long as people pass by my window and ask if they can find water beads, I felt an honor. That feeling is still imprinted in my mind. For this reason, I still remember the luxurious and joyful state of mind during illness. Therefore, I also feel a mysterious pride. As long as people pass by my window and ask if they can find water beads, I felt an honor. I'm not saying that the sunshine that shines into the room requires the elegance of pens, inkstones, and the fragrance of flowers to make it moving. What I mean is that as long as a piece of sunshine falls on the ordinary ceiling furnishings like this, elegant and free, it will be moving. Everything will bring another moving atmosphere. With that said, who should despise what feels like a little trip? In order to strengthen our courage, we should believe that only if human beings have this kind of emotional ride, the real world will continue to produce the essence of cultural relics on which our spirits are entrusted. Although it was the same as other times when I got sick, I was still alone and imprisoned in a house to recuperate. It was the last house in our old house. It had a small courtyard surrounded by whitewashed walls. There were 3 rooms in a row on the north side, with an open hall sandwiched between them. I was sick in Dong Tu Nyan's bedroom. To the west is my aunt's house. My mother-in-law and aunt always had to perform their duties as women in my grandmother's front yard, so I was often the only remaining owner of these 3 houses. When I see the same patch of sunlight hitting the ground, I feel the shadows of flowers floating on the ground, the faint fragrance blowing around, and the flowers changing with the light at noon. The movement, softness and grace are like silent music, making people feel leisurely and lighthearted, and unconsciously letting go of sadness. At most, Xu Yang's rational objectivity made me look back once in a while. Looking at the remnants left by the memories of childhood in the past, I feel a little regretful for time. Wei Wei wonders that time cannot preserve emotions and preserve the realm where all emotions once lingered. At this moment, I could cough slightly, and even say in a broadcasting tone. Since we undoubtedly cherish culture, that is, we respect all kinds of art from ancient times to the present, whether it is the art of abstract ideas, or the specific use of natural materials to create unnatural images, then we have a little bit of the origin of art. Human feelings, human emotional intelligence. Commonly known as human emotions, how should we cherish it reasonably? At this moment it is just a traceless flow with no inhabited form. It may contain various qualities that may be elusive, but it is the job of curiously exploring this quality to express it concretely, whether it makes sense or not. Except for myself, no one else can do anything. I remember I climbed up to sit on the table in front of the window in the room and looked out the window intentionally or unintentionally. The sparse shadows on the white walls of the courtyard were completely different from the golden warmth indoors. By the way, I opened the old mirror box that my mother used for dressing up. Then he shook the small row of drawers and the small copper pendant carved into the shape of a flower basket up and down, and from time to time he listened to the clear chirping of birds jumping across the branches. But there is still a vague doubt in my heart about that piece of sunshine. I am looking forward to a piece of clear. Then he shook the small row of drawers and the small copper pendant carved into the shape of a flower basket up and down, and from time to time he listened to the clear chirping of birds jumping across the branches. But there is still a vague doubt in my heart about that piece of sunshine. I am looking forward to a piece of clear and pleasant sunshine at this moment. It is clear that I am paying interested attention to the various associations of inner exchanges and changes. In other words, this curiosity and interest in paying attention are already the activities of my life at this moment. A force forced me to grasp this activity and try to express it. This impulse was not easy to restrain. Or the so-called artistic impulse is unknown. We suspect that it may be a bunch of spiritual and physical feelings in a person, a series of behaviors inspired by physical and psychological emotions, a bit of wisdom gathered, a little bit of the expression of why a person is a human being. The journey of emotions is accidental. I was not for this piece of sunshine at noon in early spring today at the beginning, and I am still for it now. There are 2 kinds of luxurious light in the room that often make my mood tense, like flowers blooming. Taking advantage of the breeze of feeling, the depth and light are scattered among the cold branches and leaves. One is candlelight, with a high pedestal, long hanging candles, blazing red flames, and shadows everywhere when the curtains are drawn. It's sparkling, bright, elegant, and has an ancient meaning. It's obviously a scene in a painting, but it contains more poetic elements. One is candlelight, with a high pedestal, long hanging candles, blazing red flames, and shadows everywhere when the curtains are drawn. It's sparkling, bright, elegant, and has an ancient meaning. It's obviously a scene in a painting, but it contains more poetic elements. At that time, large pieces of paper, intentionally or unintentionally, were scattered all over the room. The window lattice and railings, the pens and inkstones were bathed in the light, and they all became a still life pattern for a while. There were also a few red stamen twigs embellished here and there, and the room was filled with light fragrance. It makes people look down and touch a kind of spirituality. Let's just say it's a small emotional journey. It's okay not to go, but it's better to go without starting. Ultimately, what do we cherish most in this world? What is the so-called human culture if we really cherish the various activities of people who cherish the spirit of all things? What does human culture rely on? All things in the universe are objectively worthless. The mountains, rivers, vegetation, and animals reflected in human nature began to have beauty, temperament, and clarity. What does human culture rely on? All things in the universe are objectively worthless. The mountains, rivers, vegetation, and animals reflected in human nature began to have beauty, temperament, and clarity. Not to mention the people themselves who are reflected in their human nature. There are no human feelings, human emotions. Even if there is nature, there is no natural beauty, and it does not matter in terms of quality or God, let alone human wisdom, human creation, and the expression of all human art of life. Being sick in those 3 rooms was an embarrassing experience. Time passes very slowly, especially in the middle of the day when there is no sleep at all. At first, I just focused my hearing on various sounds that looked like footsteps but didn't look like footsteps. Guessing, waiting, hoping for someone to come. Occasionally, I listened to various trivial sounds on the partition wall, which were conveyed from under the wall foundation and then disappeared. After a while, I got impatient, I don't remember how. I tiptoed on my shoes and walked next to the wooden bed to the door. The door opened diagonally toward the hall, so I held the door frame and looked out curiously. I tiptoed on my shoes and walked next to the wooden bed to the door. The door opened diagonally toward the hall, so I held the door frame and looked out curiously. I just remember that the Kamdu Gongbu took a walk and looked at the flowers, and it was inevitable that the flowers on the river are so annoying that there is nowhere to tell but the madness. Emotionally confused. The exquisite and warm sunshine shines in front of people, and the touching power of its beauty is no less than that of flowers. I don't allow myself to rigidly divide my emotions into leisure and reality, and then decide the choice based on their severity. I was just emotionally confused. Leaning on a soft chair is not only a luxury, but perhaps a sin of leisure. But Dompa's defense, a lazy person always seems to be quiet, but stillness is not like a lazy person. It is not unreasonable. Leaning on a soft chair is not only a luxury, but perhaps a sin of leisure. But Dompa's defense, a lazy person always seems to be quiet, but stillness is not like a lazy person. It is not unreasonable. Others feel pity for it, but they themselves cannot but feel the sadness of this loss of intimacy. But the galloping of emotions is obviously not the completion of poetry or painting or any other artistic construction. Although this galloping now takes up a certain amount of time in my life. But it doesn't occupy any small position in the space. You need to fully understand this situation yourself. More than 20 years have passed, and until today, there is another burst of sunshine, an elusive, incredibly flowing and quiet treasure. I realized that there would never be an answer to my question. In fact, it is just that, a lonely table, a lonely corner of the hall. A clever mirror box, or the intermittent chirping of birds outside the window, and water drops, the name of the beautiful